Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope this is working. Yeah. So good morning. On behalf of Iberdrola and BirdLife International, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today at this event where we're going to explore successes and remaining challenges in terms of increasing renewable energy development in a way which ensures that we're not only addressing the climate crisis, but also are on a trajectory to ensure nature positive. I'm Nina Mikander. I'm the Global Director of Policy at BirdLife International, and I'll be guiding us through this hour with some flexibility as speakers are coming and going, but it's the COP, and I think we'll just roll with it. And without further ado, to start us off, I'd like to ask Maria Mendelucci, CEO of We Mean Business, to start us off with a few opening remarks. And thanks in advance, Maria, for welcoming us to your pavilion.
Well, thank you. I hope your energy levels are up, but if not, Diane is coming here to lift our spirits. So I'm very pleased to be here today because, honestly, it's amongst friends. Many of you know, but I worked in Iberdrola a long time ago. Too long, maybe. We keep young. And I work with Ignacio Galán, who cannot make it. But I learned a lot from Ignacio. At that time, renewables was a dream, right? It was something that people say molinillos in Spanish is a bit despective, right? Well, now renewables are the future. And often during my career, I have thought about Ignacio, and you can convey him these words, in the vision that he had at the time, and the boldness and the data. Because I was in his staff, and he used to have these dashboards, and he introduced that in Iberdrola at that time. And it's the only way to move forward is if we track, if we measure and track. And so I'm very intrigued and enthusiastic at the same time, because Iberdrola again is leading the way, in the way that Iberdrola is integrating biodiversity in its operations. And it is doing, like I'm sure that you have your dashboards, because I know Ignacio. And that's the only way to go forward. And what I like as well is that you come here to COP and you present your approach. And I know that today the room is half full because you are leading an area that is quite new. And I find that in a few years, this room will be packed, because you cannot do climate without doing nature and without doing the people side of it. So I'm very excited about the conversation. I'm also very excited about finding new solutions and the innovation that comes with leadership and the result that this can take. Now, I'm sure you will talk about it, but a key area that cuts across both areas is adaptation, and I think we need to be seriously integrating adaptation in the mitigation and nature strategies, because unfortunately we are in a 1.2 world, and it doesn't look like the degrees are going to stop here. So we look for leadership as well from companies on adaptation. It is something that is that many governments are calling on business to have leadership, because the reality is that the private sector is going to have a fundamental role in building a resilient society. And let me conclude by saying that business cannot succeed in societies that fail. This has been the motto of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development for many years. And put it simply, if societies fail, business will not have the employees, the customers, the shareholders, to bring this forward. So, we all love being in nature, and so let's imagine that we are in nature outside of the noise that we have today, and help us dream, like Ignacio did 20 years ago on a better future where nature is integrated in business operations. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. What a great opening. And next, as Maria already mentioned, unfortunately, Ignacio can't be with us today, the executive chairman of Iberdrola. Again, it's COP. But we have Emilio here with us on behalf of Iberdrola. He's the head of environment. Emilio, please.
So thank you. I'm just here to say a few words to you all. I mean, and the first thing I would like to share is to talk about our vision, the company's vision to have a road into a nature-positive activity. That's something we really pursue. I mean, sustainability has always been at the center of Iberdrola's business model. And we have improved our goals. We have made them bolder with two main objectives. One is to be fully decarbonized by before 2040 on all scopes. But we also, as Maria mentioned, we launched our biodiversity plan late last year. We committed to become biodiversity positive by 2030. That is really a challenging goal, and we are really going for it. But we need to do things together. We need to improve collaboration. None of these goals can be achieved by one single entity alone. And an example of that is the alliance we have built with BirdLife International, which is a very powerful mechanism to promote the best policies, best practices, communications, projects. So it's bringing together a conservationist actor with the business to work together and to do things better. So there is a few things I would like to say. We are facing a very important challenge, which is to triple renewable capacity over the coming years. Well, that is something we must do to tackle climate change. But we have to do this in the right way. All these developments have to be compatible, have to bring improvements for nature, have to consider local communities. And this is what we are all here for. We need to do this by implementing nature-positive solutions. And we need to do this together, enabling the right policies and developing the right agreements, the right collaborations among different stakeholders. So this panel today, this conversation, where you will hear some of the most influential actors, is a fantastic opportunity to showcase successful experiences and identify the strategic convergence and expand collaboration to achieve everything that we are committing to do. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoy this panel.
Thanks, Emilio, and I'll say a bit more about our collaboration later on. Next, I'd like to invite Amy Frankle to come up to the stage. She's Executive Secretary of the UN Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species. Amy, please.
Thank you very much. First, I think we all deserve a good prize for finding the pavilion, and thanks for all the crumbs along the way. So first, what is the Convention on Migratory Species? If you don't know us, we're one of the several global biodiversity conventions of the UN. And our focus is on migratory species because billions of animals every year are on the move. And much of the time they cross national boundaries. And if they cross national boundaries, that means that in order to conserve them and their habitats, there has to be cooperation among governments. There's no way that any one country can do it on their own, because if the other neighbors or the other range states don't act, then it won't be a successful effort. So just like national boundaries, when we talk about political developments, climate change, action to address climate change and to address biodiversity, as you know, we've created these silos. We've got different laws, we've got different agencies, we've got different priorities, we talk differently, we have different venues like this. And it doesn't make sense either. And so I'm really pleased, to be here to talk about, what we need to do to cross and harmonize our actions. Because the fact is, drivers of environmental change are the same. The things that are causing change to the planet, we can trace back to the same causes. And so we can't approach it piecemeal, looking at one little piece and then not thinking about the other. So it's really simple, but we still have a long way to go, because we have created those silos, and to break them down, is part of what we need to do. So I think the message I want to leave, because I've worked on climate, I've worked on biodiversity, I've worked with the private sector, I'm a lawyer, I worked for 7 years on Wall Street, actually, and we need to not just say we're going to do something, but we also have to do what we say we're going to do. And I want to give an example of that. And I won't, of course, name the country. And in fact, there are many countries. But unfortunately, what I have seen is, we'll say we'll do something, and even some of the most progressive, environmental thinking governments, when it comes to push comes to shove and energy needs occur and there's pressure to have renewables, species will be sacrificed. Governments will say, oh, well, it's too important for us to get the grid, operating and, replace this source of energy with another. So even though we have a law, even though we've said we're going to make sure we don't harm migratory species, we're going to sacrifice it because it's less important. And it's not an isolated, message. I've heard it. Many people saying, all we're going to do is put renewable energy. I've heard this in many circles of decision makers who are very powerful in terms of determining the pathway. And that's troubling, because if those entities are taking those decisions, then what does it mean for entities that are not at the front edge? So it's actually extremely critical what we're talking about here. I'm really, very happy to hear about the private sector efforts that you're taking, because that's what we need to see. We need more upfront planning and thinking about how are we going to achieve where we're going, but do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice the very nature that we need to survive. And migratory species, just to give a little plug, we're going to be launching an incredible report. It's going to be a press event on the 10th at 10 o'clock. There's a room. I have a room. I have to find it if you're interested. On my phone. But it's basically about climate change and migratory species, but not just the impacts on migratory species, but migratory species, their benefits for ecosystems, and what happens if we sacrifice them in terms of our goals on climate as well. So I hope you'll join me there. It's a ministerial event. It should be pretty amazing. And the last thing I'll say is, in terms of the pragmatic level, and Nina and Rhiannon and others know this well, we launched at CMS a really amazing initiative called the Energy Task Force. And this is something that is pragmatic. It's operating at that level where even if a government or a company wants to do the right thing, they need the right tools. And so the whole purpose of this is to say it's doable. And we can map areas for wind, and we can map migrating patterns for birds, and we can say, it's better not to put your wind farm there. It's better to put it here. It's better to think about this way of operating your facilities to minimize impacts. And if you do that planning up front, it's better for investment, it's better for operations, it's better for nature, it's better for climate. So it makes the world of sense. And I'm really pleased to say that it's been growing and growing in engagement. And it's kind of like, it's right on that edge of like scaling up in a major way, with many countries coming on board. The World Bank is a member now. IFC and others, ADB. I mean, it's a lot of development banks, and I know industries at the table as well, which we welcome. So let me stop there and just say thank you. It's a real pleasure. This is my first speaking event. Hopefully it's the furthest away from the entrance. No, seriously. It's really great to be here among people who get it, and look forward to the other speakers and to getting this message out. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Amy, and thanks. I'm so happy that you could make it to the event with us today. So now we're going to move to the round table. So can I invite our 5 panelists? Gilles, unfortunately, wasn't able to make it, but if you could come and grab a seat up front, that would be great. And so whilst you're finding your seats, just as a bit of an introduction, you know, it's been mentioned by Maria and others today, very fortunate to have an illustrious group with us today to help us figure out what those practical, pragmatic next steps in terms of alliances should be going forward. And as Maria said in the beginning, you know, this is maybe, I mean, the room is no longer half empty, but this is really something that's I think we're all on the cusp of something big. And I think we all are in agreement that we need to form alliances and work together to bring it forward, bring this issue forward. And you might be wondering why a bird conservation NGO is standing up here moderating this event. I mean, it's been alluded to a bit, but also from our side, we realized quite a long time ago. So BirdLife is the world's largest conservation partnership. So we have partners in 120 countries, and obviously energy developments are a big issue in all of those. And we realized a long time ago that if we wanted to be serious about having renewable energy, but also having it in a way that won't be catastrophic for birds, migratory or not, then we need to work together to help governments, but also increasingly everybody else to find those tools and solutions that are needed. So we coordinate the CMS Energy Task Force that Amy just mentioned. Rhiannon's the coordinator. She's here in the front row. She's our energy and climate lead. And we've also developed Avistep, which is a sensitivity mapping tool, et cetera, et cetera. And we're working with many governments. But what we find to help them develop this, but what we find at the moment is that it's still piecemeal. And we really need, because the energy transition needs to happen quickly, and we can't be doing it like this the way we've been doing it so far. So that's why I'm so happy that you're all here. So if we start, I gave you a little task before the event. So I asked you to share what's working, what's the biggest challenge, and what's your one-liner recommendation for change where you would suggest that we work together. So if we start off from the policy side, because we have Kristen and Beverly here. So Kristen, do you want to start off representing World Economic Forum?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
So, sorry. There are microphones on the floor. Sorry.
That will help. Hi. So, Kristen Panarelli from the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum, for those of you that don't know, we bring together the public and the private with civil society to look at those big challenges. And lately, within the Center for Energy and Materials, we have been looking at this nexus between energy and nature and people. And we've been really looking at how to make this transition both rapid and responsible. We all know that tripling renewables is going to require a lot of land. It's going to have to intersect with both nature and with people. And so we have to be really dealing with a lot of issues like permitting and land use and communities, as well as biodiversity. And this week we're in fact launching a report that's focused on community engagement, doing better community engagement, and we're calling it a people positive approach. And so I think that, you know, from our perspective, you know, one of the bigger problems is that it's not at the top level of thought. We need to mainstream this vision about what responsible deployment looks like. And there's also not common definitions about what people positive means. What does it mean to really do better community engagement? What does a just transition really mean? I think we understand what does a sustainable transition look like. We understand what does a secure transition look like. But the term equitable and just is not well understood. And I think that's where we know it's about access and economic opportunity, but there's also something about how do you really engage people so that you can make your projects better. So that would conclude the problem part.
Thank you.
From our perspective right now. And then later I'll share a bit more what we want to do about it and how we're outlining some of the solutions in the report that we're doing and in the mobilization of stakeholders.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can I pass on to Beverly, please?
I'm Bev Cornaby. I'm director of our UK Corporate Leaders Group based at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. We also have a European Corporate Leaders Group as well, which Iberdrola are a member of. They're a member of the UK Corporate Leaders Group through Scottish Power. So we interact with businesses. We have been working with them in terms of actually what they're doing on business and nature, and again, bringing in the people side as well. There's a bit of context that I just want to set, which I think is important to mention, which is kind of underlying to this, which is we know that nature is depleted. And in the European Union in particular, then that's 80% of habitats. I'm from the UK. We also are one of the, actually, it's quite surprising to think that we're one of the most nature depleted countries that there is. And businesses are seeing this, and they're seeing this both through their operations in those countries, but also elsewhere. And therefore, they're looking at this and seeing it's important. It was mentioned around, we're at the climate COP. There is also a biodiversity COP. Last year, there were 400 business and financial institutions from 52 countries that actually called for Target 15, which requires all large businesses and financial institutions to assess and disclose their risks, impacts, and dependencies on biodiversities. So they're really waking up to actually what they can do and how they deliver this. In relation to renewables, then there are challenges, and certainly we've led conversations, including one last year at COP, which explored some of the trade-offs that need to happen, and some of that is how do you bring communities in, how do you consider nature? And with the tripling renewables target, then that's going to become an even bigger challenge in terms of actually, some of what was talked to, what Amy referred to, which is about how do you decide what land gets used for what? So one of the things that I want to pick up on is actually how do we therefore create the right policy frameworks and what can support business to make sure that they're able to consider this and take action in the way that Iberdrola already have. So Iberdrola do have a project which is Núñez de Bilbao, where they have a photovoltaic plant, and they have actually managed to increase the biodiversity there. And therefore, it's, how do we enable more businesses to do that, and to do that from the start of the projects when they're actually going to put these renewables in and not just as an afterthought. So one of the things that we've been calling on, particularly in the UK, is actually a land use framework that actually looks at how do you best balance the demands on land. And that's not just thinking about it in terms of renewables versus biodiversity, it's also thinking about it in farming, thinking about it in terms of homes. There's a lot of pressures on land, and therefore how do we enable policy to be set up in the right way to actually enable it. And so I think that's one of the things that I want to kind of end with is actually that, that we see as key is actually those kind of clear, consistent, and also kind of certain policy-making frameworks, particularly through that land use side.
Fantastic. So if we move the conversation from policy to finance, Ignacio, the money man's the most important one.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's fine. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. For us, it's great to be here, first of all, to learn. And this is for us essential that this conversation between renewables and biodiversity start going deeper. And we want to be part of that conversation and to learn and also to share our views. First, I just want to present the case of finance, but I will do it through our experience, which I believe is an ongoing process, but can somehow speak on different levels of what things need to be achieved. The first is that as a multilateral development bank, and in the context of the Paris Agreement, we have a very clear mandate on the Paris Agreement and also from a board of directors, which of course are our countries in the region, to align ourselves to investment in terms of green finance. And that implied to us that we started an internal process to shift our portfolios and our the way we do things, in particular in infrastructure, which is our main business portfolio, in a way that we integrate climate. But for us, and this is something that was quite new to us, but we thought that was quite relevant, is that we need to understand that green finance in terms, not only in terms of mitigation, but of mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and biodiversity and ecosystems as well. So that was our first signal that we wanted our process in place, and the narrative and the vision of that green finance and these financial flows alignment in an integrated, holistic approach in terms of environment. So that becomes a message and a policy within our institution, but that also required building the capacities inside and the right conversation inside between what we are our more traditional areas of work and expertise to this emerging expertise, which require a great deal of knowledge, of information, of data. You place the data issue just from the beginning of the conversation, and that made for us complete sense in the context of our region. So we start also to build a concept that we presented at COP this year, which is our strategic ecosystems framework. And that also speaks to a policy issue which speaks about integration of our countries as well, because we have large infrastructure projects that are also could be multinational. So this ecosystem strategic framework requires us to see and to better understand what are key ecosystems. And I'm not speaking only about the Amazons, but El Cerrado, Mata Atlántica, Pantanal, Chaco, Bioma Pampa, the Andes, the Surgencia, von Humboldt, the Caribbean, the mangroves. So this data starts to emerge, start to inform our infrastructure design and investment. And imagine the amount of complexities, the data that we need to gather, and the vision in terms of design that needs to shift. So we are right in the middle of that, and it's complex. I want to be very, very clear on that. But the message of us going forward in that direction, feel absolutely comfortable with that, and we see that is where our region at the end of the day needs. So it's the right path. So we just wanted to signal that it's not an easy task, but it's the right conversation. And again, to signal our congratulations and our thanks for being invited to this conversation, because we need to have a lot more of this to better understand the implications and integration of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Ignacio, and thanks also to CAF for leading the way in general on this. We also have a project together on a regional flyway initiative, so we're working on exactly these kind of topics, not specific to renewables, but to restoration, etc. So, okay, thanks for that. And if we move to business, Diane, would you like to go next, please?
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Holdorf from the WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge how far we've come on the discussion of nature, not just within the context of climate action, but within the context of nature-based action that provides the kind of inclusive solutions that solve for species, communities, and the climate agenda. That allows us to have a very different conversation here than we had in Sharm, or even that we had in Montreal. The momentum, though, is clear that we need to continue to act. And I want to take a moment to recognize Iberdrola and thank them for pulling together this conversation, because it's by having really leading companies like Iberdrola, who in a sector many would consider to be impossible to set 2030 targets for net zero, much less nature positive, They're out there leading the way, and that changes our ability to have this conversation as well. Without the foundation of that type of ambitious leadership, it's difficult to have the proof points that show people the actions that can be taken. That's a big part of the work that we do together at WBCSD. I mean, clearly, we've been working on the climate journey for a long time. We were key partners launching the Tripling Renewables business portion of the pledge in September that brought 117 countries together, step back on that notice, to drive investment with the announcements here at this COP. We had the launch of the Industrial Transition Accelerator at this COP, which will drive tremendous prioritization into the types of green industrial corridor transformations that can be starting to plan early for the types of species conversations shifts that we need to have, like Amy, you said just before in your opening comments. This is a key aspect of having a much more integrated conversation. But yet, for many companies who are still on the climate journey, starting to understand what work needs to be done for nature can seem very challenging. And to cut through that complexity, working together with over 70 of our member companies, partners like the World Economic Forum and Business for Nature and the Capitals Coalition, we actually launched an unprecedented suite of guidance materials for companies in September on what it means to start on that nature-positive journey and what the roadmap and guidance, the very specific steps, need to look like. And of those 70 companies, we had more than 20 actually in the energy sector who put together a deep dive, step-by-step starting point for what it means to assess the impacts and dependencies of an organization on the nature agenda, to know what is material based on the energy sector in this case, both production of traditional and renewables, what it means to then set transition plans, often aligned to climate goals, but sometimes beyond that, and then how to start to tee that up for the types of disclosure and strong governance that will be required to be able to report into regulatory requirements like the CSRD and voluntary financial requirements like the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. That's going to be very important for the type of accountability and transparency that companies are going to need to bring to advance this agenda in a way that is credible, high ambition, and really delivers on the nature agenda with integrity as with the climate agenda. There are some very key aspects to that materiality. And again, Iberdrola has been leading in this space of understanding how do we think about these impacts quite differently. And for the renewable space, of course, the placement of the expansion to triple is going to be the key factor. We talk about grid limits, we talk about permitting restrictions and timelines. Often that doesn't fully incorporate the impacts on the local communities, the local shorelines, the local species, where this work needs to have meaning and place-based solutions. And that's the action that we can continue to build on and take together. With that, I'll pass back and we'll continue the conversation.
Thanks so much, Diane. And I'll pass on to Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca, for your thoughts. Thanks.
Hello. Sorry for being late and lurking in. It's not an authentic COP experience if you don't find yourself without water in the sun somewhere in the desert of the blue zone. So anyway, I'm here now. Yeah, thank you. Some really interesting perspectives from the panelists that I heard there. So just by way of introduction, I'm Rebecca Williams. I head up our offshore wind team at the Global Wind Energy Council. We're the ones, along with the other renewable industries, who with Irina and the presidency have been really pushing the tripling agenda, which we were really pleased to see adopted as a pledge the other day. Now all our efforts and focus turn on to getting that into the COP text. But full disclosure, I also used to work for WWF. So I wear a few different hats in this space, and maybe I'll just bring the conversation around to the kind of marine space and some of the challenges and opportunities that I see from that perspective. So from an offshore wind perspective, I think it's fair to say that governments that we're dealing with, they don't really know a lot about offshore wind. They know even less potentially about the kind of seabed area and the marine landscape around them. It's quite a new concept to a lot of the countries and governments we work with. Just an anecdote, for instance, we've worked over a number of years with the Japanese government. Until a few years ago, no one really knew who owned the seabed in Japan. So it's a really kind of emerging field of regulation, but at the same time, we've got a lot of co-users of the marine space, not just biodiversity and renewables, but obviously other industries as well. And what we're striving for is some kind of harmonious meeting of interests between renewables and biodiversity, and also being able to sustainably shift via just transition other industries where needed. Sounds simple as I say it, but obviously this is one of the most complex stakeholder interrelationships that are out there, I think, in terms of how we get these marine stakeholders to line up and have a proper kind of process around this. So just to kind of go into the detail of what we're doing here, actually today GWEC is launching a new NGO, which is called Ocean Energy Pathway. We will be launching it later today in the Global Renewables Hub. The point of this NGO is that we can bring together in a shared strategic approach civil society with kind of the best bits, I guess, of industry without some of the kind of corporate interests, and come together in a way that will enable us to really shift the dial on some of these challenges that we're facing. So this is particularly focused on the marine space. It's an offshore wind accelerator program, and as I mentioned, it's joint with NGOs and major philanthropy. So please do come along if you'd like to hear more about that. That's at 2 p.m. in the Global Renewables Hub. So that's one kind of practical step, because we do see the great need for more coordination in this space. I think just kind of looking at this from maybe a more detailed perspective, some of the work that we've been doing over the past years is really trying to get some definitions around some of these concepts that we've been talking about. So what do we actually mean by net biodiversity gain? What do we actually mean, and how do we measure positive projects for biodiversity? Because at the moment it's very kind of opaque. There's no agreed definition, and many of our members have been working very closely with major thinkers and NGOs in this field to try and get definitions that we can apply globally for these very concepts. And look, we don't have all the answers right now. I think that's clear, and if anyone on this panel thinks differently, I don't think we'd be telling the truth. We don't have all the answers, but what we do have is a commitment to learning together and getting this right, and getting the balance between some of the challenges that have been flagged here. So speed and scale for tripling, of course, but also protection of biodiversity. How do we meet together with the ocean and climate nexus, for instance? Still, these processes are extremely siloed. We have the UNFCCC here, and then practically no one, as far as I'm aware, then goes and attends the Oceans Conference from this constituency of people, and vice versa. So I think we want to try and learn together. We want to put in place structures that are flexible enough to withstand changes in the science as they come about, and to improve our understanding. I think the role of data is obviously an absolutely key one here, which has been discussed a lot, I'm sure. And I'm sorry if I missed the earlier part of the panel, but I'll bank on the fact that it's been discussed many times already. I think in terms of data and data sharing, which is just critical and fundamental to our shared understanding of the marine environment, I think we need to have an honest conversation. We need to try and find solutions to the sharing of that data through single authorities, which are held at government level or a quasi-governmental, who can help present a more kind of open door, one-stop shop policy for these data solutions, so that we can start to plan for the future in the right way, rather than having to then try and work our way through a myriad of different challenges once we've already started putting steel in the water, which has happened before. So looking at the offshore wind growth trajectory around the world, we're expecting a lot of offshore wind to be built in the next few years. So 380 gigawatts by 2030 is the target that we have. And based on pledges that are out there today, it looks like we're going to kind of get near that amount, which is great. But I think we have this opportunity right now because many markets are at the beginning of their understanding in this journey to put in place a framework that suits the stakeholders that we have. But we do need to do that in a fast and aligned and streamlined way. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Yeah, definitely not a COP without sort of semi-sunstroke and stranded without water somewhere. But we're really happy that you made it. Okay, so we've had a first round from the panelists, and now I would like to ask if anybody has any questions from the floor. I think we have a microphone that can be passed around. Colleagues from the or. Oh, there's one coming from the back. Just a minute. Yeah, so please introduce yourself and ask a question. Thanks.
Hi, this was an amazing panel, thank you. My name is Jacob Lawrence. I'm work in the shipping industry. So I couldn't agree more with the data sharing point. I think that's critical to measure, biodiversity and as well as learn more about those trade-offs that were mentioned earlier by Amy. So I guess my question is around how do you incentivize the private sector to provide sets of data? Like in our industry, we collect, data about like whale species, or we're learning a lot about, ice melting or ocean acidification. So is there like some sort of categorization of that data, or have you been actively leveraging companies to kind of know what to provide? Thank you so much.
Who would like to have a go? Yeah?
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned before about actually the requirement to disclose, and I think that's going to be one of the drivers for data. I think one of the things that hopefully that might also create is consistent data, which I think is, everyone can collect data, but if it's not consistent and we don't understand how it, what is needed, how it gets used, and therefore can make it comparable between different businesses, that they can use it in different ways, but also it can go through to investors, which I think is also one of the things. It's how to unlock funding to then make a difference, because you can have the data, but it's also how you use that data that's going to be critical. And, I know we hadn't actually mentioned too much about data actually before you came in, but I think it is key as well, because what I think one of the challenges is understanding, I mentioned about actually the nation, we are in a nature depleted world at the moment, and actually how do we understand what is that level of depletion, and therefore what is the data that's needed, and how do we understand once we've actually shifted and got it to a positive level of biodiversity. And I think that is also one of the challenges that we need to work with business on, that hopefully, some of the work that was mentioned from Business for Nature and WBCSD will help. But I think there is also a first step, which is actually getting businesses to understand what are their risks in relation to biodiversity and nature, and therefore how do they act on those, and therefore what data will they need to be able to proceed.
I think she went, yeah.
Yeah, is it okay if I go? So yeah, data. You're from a shipping company, you'll know the value also of commercially sensitive data in this regard. I think we need to get a good balance here between sharing the data that's needed to inform decisions around how we can better protect biodiversity. So in the marine environment, geotechnical data, but also data around how assets interact with species. But I think there's a way to do that where we're sharing useful metadata rather than having to share commercially sensitive data. And there's a balance to be struck then between that kind of transparency and commercial risk, as I'm sure you're aware. So just to say, I think there are pathways through this, and I think what's really exciting actually is AI in this field, because it's going to help us actually a lot, I believe, in getting this balance right and in being able to share useful information, because as we all know, rubbish in, rubbish out when it comes to data, right? So in sharing useful information that can inform our collective decision making, and from the very beginning get a good enough map of that space so that we're able to take decisions on that basis.
Thanks. I think, Kristen, you had a point you wanted to make.
Yeah, just a quick point. I think that a lot of businesses are leading on this, like Iberdrola. And one of the things that we're trying to do is mainstream this so that more businesses are focused on taking a people positive and a nature positive approach. But one of the drivers for this is just simply business value. Because if you're doing this right, you're also able to accelerate your timelines, your time to deployment. If we're talking about deploying clean power infrastructure. So there is something about, doing good and doing good here.
Thanks. Okay. This was a good question because everybody wants to say something. So I think, Diane, you were next.
We can take more questions.
Okay. I think we had another question here, gentleman in the back.
Hi, Ross McFarland. I'm Vice President for Conservation for Sierra Club, which is the U.S.'s largest grassroots NGO in this area, and also chair our Business Partnership Committee. I'd say that this is probably the biggest issue that I'm facing, especially in the policy discussion internally at Sierra Club. We're 100% pro-climate, pro-renewable build-out in the abstract, but when we get down to our grassroots chapters and volunteers, we often don't have the information and we don't have the alliances and partnerships. So my question to y'all is how can we better operationalize those kind of partnerships so that we can really both getting the good information from you but also be engaging with you on the ground as the projects are moving forward, instead of, for example, arguing about ways to maybe bulldoze permit requirements, which has been happening in Washington, D.C.
Very interesting question. Let's have Diane. Do you want to respond to that, or Ignacio? Yeah, just good. Yeah.
So I will start by saying there's actually, in this instance, no replacement for local engagement. That goes without saying. Whether it's local community, indigenous community, the conversation around engagement, accountability, mutual benefits has to take place locally. Shortcutting that can work for things like long-scale grid installations, but not for long-term permanence of the types of nature-based solutions that can be unlocked when you place renewables in a really smart way. So that would be the first step. But we do, as you said, need to find the balance to accelerating timelines. These things get very bogged down very quickly. And having the right informed conversation with the right data, with the right materiality understanding, with the right agility to adapt becomes really, really important. And those are conversations that need to be held in ways that we've not traditionally done them. We tend to think about this at a city's level, for example, but these types of installations need to happen at a regional, national, multinational level. And that requires really a different level of advanced engagement on the planning conversations. And I think, I come back to some of the mechanisms that are being launched here at this COP in particular to allow us to look at how we start those conversations from a different place and then accelerate the funding and the community engagement that will unlock it. That's what we're seeing work best.
Thanks. Ignacio, do you want to come in?
Yes, I will take on both questions because I believe they are related. I was required to speak from the finance perspective, but we are not a normal bank in a way. We are first an intergovernmental organization, so we of course deal with finance, but we are owned by governments and we are mainly an international public organization. So I will speak also from that perspective, if I may. So what we are seeing in the region, Latin American region, is an evolving process in terms of both strengthening national capacities and legal framework for environment and in particular the way that permits are allowed and the kind of requirements that are needed and again in a context of particularly relevant ecosystems, these things tends to be quite strategic. And on another layer, there's also a work going on under the Escazú Agreement, which is a UN regional agreement on transparency of environmental information, access to environmental justice. So we are starting to think an emerging context where companies are required to act more transparent in terms of delivering and producing data and also sharing that data, not only to the public sector but also in terms of the community. And in a way, and I will go and switch from a let's say a mandatory aspects to a collaborative aspect, is that also companies tend to see that since those requirements are starting to get in more stronger, there's an option there for the emergence of alliances of private companies saying, okay, we're going to work on this area of the country where there is not enough data that will require us for a larger investment in data, longer times for our permits to be allowed. So they're starting to build some alliances, for example, with academia, local academia, to build that data in the long run and that data to be shared. So in a way, when a new company comes to a table or has a new project on the ground, there's already an ecosystem of work done, and perhaps that new company may complement an additional data that is missing, but somehow it builds as a collective action. And that also, again, speaking to the issue of the communities, if that process is well anchored on domestic universities, labs, the community, that also works a lot better. For example, in most of Latin American countries, there is a moment of public consultation, and that public consultation should be based on this information for us having better decisions.
Thanks. So we're almost at time. Okay, well, I think this is a conversation that needs to continue, but did you still want to come in at the end?
I just wanted to mention something, because obviously you mentioned about actually how do you engage people, and I think one of the things that I wanted to mention in relation to what Iberdrola did and the project that I referred to before was that the consultation was actually around the conservation objectives as well. So it's actually how do you define those, not just looking at where the project is, what it will deliver, the kind of that side in terms of the renewables, but also it's looking at the conservation objectives, and therefore what do people think about that, because in many ways that community can then also take some ownership of actually helping to conserve that area, and therefore kind of help and support with that in terms of the implementation.
Okay, no.
Maybe
sorry.
one final.
Fine.
Just a good example of some of that happening in the UK with onshore wind that you might want to look at. So there's been a few projects where communities have been engaged, as you say, in the environmental objectives, and it has resulted in peat restoration, habitat restoration, and a lot of kind of co-benefits. Anyway, I know that case studies are everything when you when you're actually kind of at the coalface here, so to speak. So I think there are some good case studies out there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. We're at time, and I'm not going to do a big closing, but thank you so much, everybody. I think we got a massive amount of valuable ideas there. I mean, our advantage working in the renewable energy sector is, of course, that if you compare it, for example, to agriculture, we have a lot sort of a shorter pathway towards the solutions here. In a way, it's a smaller community. I mean, still big. Challenges are there, but definitely when we work together, we can make progress on this. So let's do that, exchange information, and let's keep the conversation going. And Iberdrola and BirdLife are here, to support everybody in that and continue leading the way. Thank you. Oh yeah, let's take a picture.